So I'm going to talk about standard 5 positive classroom environment. I mentioned in my rationale that classroom management is one of the most important components in a successful classroom. I like my classroom environment to be very positive so that everyone can have fun while learning in my class. Usually on the first day of class, I go over my rules and expectations in my class, like I don't want my students talking while I'm talking. Don't get up out of your seat unless you ask permission. Don't be late whenever class starts. So usually my students know when the bell rings, they need to be seated in their spots, and then I'll begin class. Students need to raise their hand before talking, so no blurting out, even the students at home. If they're virtual learning, then they need to have their mics on mute unless they have a question. Also some expectations, is I want them to ask questions. I like to be, I like my classroom to be very engaging. I like everyone to participate. And then also some more rules. I want everyone to pay attention to my class. I don't want anybody sleeping, or I don't want anybody to have their phones on and playing on their phones. I don't want students to have headphones in either. I see that a lot. So that's just a class rule that I don't allow. My students also will know what kind of disciplines they'll get for each of these rules. So usually I give all my students 10 points at the beginning of class. And if they break any of the rules, then they'll lose 2 points. And also they'll get 2 warnings before they will be removed from my class, and I will call parents, and then and then we'll go from there. And also at the beginning of my class too, I talk about the expectations that I have for my students. To show up on time every day, to turn in all their homework, ask questions, participate. Because if students don't participate, especially in virtual learning, I don't know if they're there or not, or if they're paying attention. So I want them to participate the whole time during class, so that I know they're paying attention and I know that they're in class the whole entire time as well. And at the beginning of the day, I always let my students know that I am here for them, and if they need anything, that I'll be there for them. So I really show them my caring side, because again, if any of my students have problems at home or at school, I want them to come to me. I think that's extremely important for students to know that, so that they feel comfortable in my classroom. And then once I go over my rules and expectations, I have all my students come up with their own rules and expectations, because I want them to all brainstorm together as a class and come up with their own rules that they all need to follow, like no eating in class, no drinking anything in class, don't get up whenever you want and wander around, stuff like that. Then also in my rationale, I talked about engagement strategies. So I always want all my students to be engaged the whole time, because if students aren't engaged, then they're more likely to think about something else that may not be so good, that might get them in trouble. So if you keep them engaged in homework or in a group activity, they're likely to focus on that and not, doing something to others, like bully other students or anything like that. I also try to make my class extremely engaging by going over things that my students are interested in. So I don't want to go over a sport like golf or volleyball if none of my students play those sports or they don't watch them. I want to go over sports like basketball and football that my students actually play and they actually watch, because that's going to make them interested in it. That's going to make them engaged. That's going to get them excited to come to class and learn about that particular sport, and practice that sport as well. In my rationale, I also talked about building classroom culture. So usually I always give my students feedback, good or bad feedback. And by that I mean good feedback if we're going over a basketball unit and one of my students shooting really well, has got a good form. I tell that student that, and that really makes them feel good about themselves. It's like, oh, hey, Mr. Lynn thinks I'm doing a great job. Like, that's awesome. So that way, it makes that student more positive about his or her shot. And then also, students, if they're not doing something correct, I let them know as well, because I don't want them to keep doing something wrong. And the students appreciate that, so that gives them something to work on. And also, I want to tell my students what they're doing wrong, because I want to see their progress and I want to see what their full potential is, because I know that you can always get better. Like I tell my students, practice makes perfect. And then also, don't just celebrate grades. So just don't tell students, hey, good job, good job. Just to the students that got A's or B's on a test. Some student may struggle on your test and maybe one of them got a C or they're doing better. Always celebrate, everything in your classroom. Whether someone has been coming late to your class and now they're on time every single day, reward them or say, hey, I like how you're coming to class on time every day. I really appreciate that. And then also in my rationale, I talked about how going back to my expectation and rules, you need to be very consistent and organized. So if someone is doing something they're not supposed to, then you can't just let someone slide and then discipline the other student if they do the same exact thing. So you got to discipline all your students the same. You can't favor one student over the other. That's not good. And then that just kind of, throws the students off a little bit as well. So, you got to be very, you just got to be very consistent with your disciplines. Oops. So yeah, basically, I just think, you just have to have a good classroom management plan overall, so that way your students aren't coming to class all crazy and stuff. And also some of my classroom expectations is like my students know that whenever the bell rings that, class time's ready to start. And I want everyone to get in a routine every day so that we can get class started as soon as possible, because a minute or two, that adds up after a week or a month or 2 months. So I want to get class started as soon as possible so everyone can learn as much material as possible. So there's my standard 5 classroom management rationale and classroom management plan.